The first thing Alana Brooks heard after giving birth was not congratulations. It was her husband's voice saying, "Don't let her touch the baby." The words sliced through the hospital room like glass. Alana lay weak against the pillows, sweat still clinging to her skin, her arms reaching instinctively toward the small bundle the nurse had just lifted from the bassinet. Her newborn son. But the nurse hesitated. Alana blinked in confusion. "What are you doing? Give him to me." No one moved. At the foot of the bed stood Grant Whitaker, tall, perfectly composed in his expensive coat. Beside him was a woman Alana had never seen before, blonde, poised, watching the scene unfold with unsettling calm. Then two hospital security guards stepped into the room. Alana's pulse spiked. "Grant, what is this?" Grant didn't answer her question. Instead, he turned to the nurse. "Doctor's orders," he said coolly. "The baby stays away from her until the psychiatric evaluation is complete." The room spun. "Psychiatric what?" Alana's voice cracked. "Are you insane? I just gave birth." The guards moved closer. The nurse slowly backed away, with the baby still in her arms. Panic surged through Alana's chest. "Grant," she said, louder now. "Stop this. Let me hold my son." Grant's expression never changed. In fact, he almost looked relieved. "You're not well, Alana," he replied quietly. "Everyone agrees it's safer this way." "Everyone?" she whispered. Behind him, the strange woman folded her arms, watching. Alana's heart pounded harder. Something was terribly wrong. As the guards reached for her arms, Alana shouted, struggling against the hospital bed. "This is illegal. I'm an attorney. I know my rights." Grant leaned closer, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. "Not if a doctor declares you a danger to your child." The words hit like a punch to the lungs. Before she could react, the guards lifted her from the bed. The last thing Alana saw before the door slammed shut was the nurse carrying her baby away, while Grant calmly signed paperwork on a clipboard. And the woman beside him smiled. Now, before we go any further, take a second to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel, because what happened to Alana Brooks that night would uncover a conspiracy powerful enough to shake one of Chicago's richest families. Because the truth is, Grant Whitaker didn't just betray his wife. He had been planning this moment for months. And what he wanted from Alana was worth destroying her life for. 3 months earlier, no one in Chicago would have believed Alana Brooks was headed for disaster. On paper, her life looked untouchable. Alana was one of the city's most respected housing rights attorneys, known for taking on landlords and developers who forced working families out of their homes. She had built a reputation for standing in courtrooms where powerful people expected easy victories and beating them. Grant Whitaker was the opposite kind of power. A polished real estate developer, heir to the Whitaker development empire, his company built luxury towers across Chicago's skyline, the kind that reshaped entire neighborhoods. Together, they were the couple people admired. Elegant charity galas, magazine photos, fundraisers where Grant donated millions and Alana spoke about community justice. But beneath the public image, the balance inside the marriage had quietly begun to shift. It started with money. One evening, Alana logged into their joint account to pay a contractor working on their house renovation. The account was empty. Not frozen, not hacked. Simply moved. When she confronted Grant that night, he didn't even pretend it was an accident. "I consolidated everything into a corporate structure," he explained calmly while pouring himself a drink. "It's cleaner for tax purposes." "You moved our entire savings without telling me," Alana said. "It's temporary." "That wasn't the agreement." Grant shrugged, like the conversation bored him. "It's handled." The dismissive tone bothered her more than the money. For the first time in their marriage, Grant wasn't treating her like a partner. He was treating her like someone who didn't need explanations. Weeks later, the second crack appeared. Alana was reviewing legal files from one of her housing cases when a property address stopped her cold. The development project forcing tenants out of the building belonged to Whitaker Development Group, Grant's company. At dinner that night, she slid the documents across the table. "Tell me this isn't your project." Grant glanced at the page and leaned back in his chair. "It's one of ours. You're evicting 40 families. It's a redevelopment. Grant, they've lived there for decades. They're being compensated." Alana studied him carefully. "You bribed the inspection board to condemn the building." Grant's jaw tightened slightly. "You're making assumptions. I've seen the paperwork." For a moment, the room went completely silent. Then Grant smiled. Not warmly, not apologetically, just calmly. "Cities evolve," he said. "Neighborhoods change." "That's not evolution," Alana replied. "That's displacement." Grant tapped the table lightly with his finger. "Your clients want cheap rent forever. Investors want growth. Those two things don't coexist. So your solution is to push them out?" "My solution," Grant said, "is building something more valuable." The words landed like a warning. Alana suddenly realized something she had never considered before. Her husband didn't see the family she fought for as people. He saw them as obstacles. The tension between them grew sharper when Alana became pregnant. At first, Grant acted thrilled. He told friends he was ready to build a family legacy. But almost immediately, his behavior shifted. He began insisting Alana reduce her workload. Then he suggested she step away from litigation completely. "You shouldn't be stressing yourself in courtrooms," he said one night. "Focus on the baby. I've tried cases pregnant before. This is different." "How?" "Because now I'm asking you to stop." It was the first time he had framed something as a command. Alana felt the shift instantly. "Grant," she said carefully, "my work matters. So does your health. My doctor says I'm fine." Grant's voice cooled. "Your priorities are changing, whether you like it or not." That was the moment the argument truly began. Because Alana wasn't just fighting for her career anymore. She was beginning to realize she might be living with a man whose ambitions had no limits. And if Grant Whitaker was the kind of man who removed problems, not compromises with them, and Alana Brooks had just become the biggest problem in his world. Pregnancy should have brought Alana Brooks and Grant Whitaker closer. Instead, it changed the balance of power inside their marriage. And Grant moved fast to take control. It started with small decisions that sounded reasonable on the surface. "You should cut back your caseload," Grant said one morning while scanning emails at the kitchen counter. "Stress isn't good for the baby." Alana didn't even look up from her files. "My doctor says my blood pressure is perfect." Grant closed the laptop slowly. "I'm not asking as a doctor." She met his eyes. "Then why are you asking?" "Because I'm your husband." The conversation ended there, but the pressure didn't. Within weeks, Grant began inserting himself into every part of her life. He started scheduling her doctor appointments. He insisted on hiring a driver so she wouldn't overexert herself. Then he suggested something bigger. "You should take maternity leave early," he said one evening. "I'm only 5 months pregnant. You've already proven yourself. Why keep pushing?" Alana stared at him across the table. "Because families are about to lose their homes if I stop." Grant leaned back calmly. "That's not your responsibility." "It literally is." "No," he replied quietly. "It's a choice." That word hung between them. Choice. Grant had begun treating her work like a hobby she could walk away from. But the real warning sign appeared 2 weeks later. Alana arrived at her law office and found her access card rejected at the entrance. Security explained that the building's lease had been purchased by a new property owner overnight. Whitaker Development Group, Grant's company. Her entire firm had been given 60 days to relocate. That night she confronted him in the living room. "You bought the building my law firm works in." Grant didn't deny it. "It was a strategic acquisition. You're forcing my firm out. It's a redevelopment opportunity. You're targeting my cases." Grant poured himself a drink. "Your firm will find another office." "That's not the point." Grant's voice sharpened slightly. "You're letting your job define your life, and you're trying to erase it." He took a slow sip, watching her carefully. "You're pregnant, Alana. Things are changing, not my principles." Grant set the glass down. "For someone who claims to fight powerful systems," he said calmly, "you seem surprised when those systems push back." Alana felt something shift in that moment. This wasn't about real estate. Grant wasn't just building developments. He was removing resistance. And her work defending displaced families had placed her directly in his path. The next move came faster than she expected. A week later, their joint credit cards stopped working. When she called the bank, they informed her the accounts had been closed and transferred into a corporate holding structure controlled by Grant. When she confronted him again, he didn't even raise his voice. It's temporary financial management. You cut me off from my own money. You're overreacting. Grant, that's not legal. His expression hardened for the first time. You're carrying my child, he said. I'm protecting our family's future. By isolating me, by stabilizing things before you create problems. The words landed heavily. Alana studied him carefully. Problems, she repeated. Grant held her gaze. Yes. That was the moment she understood something critical. Grant didn't see their marriage as a partnership anymore. He saw it as a structure he controlled. And if Alana continued fighting the development projects his company depended on, she wasn't just a disagreement, she was a threat. And Grant Whitaker had already begun quietly preparing to eliminate threats. The first betrayal didn't arrive as a confession. It arrived as a small plastic stick hidden inside Grant's gym bag. Alana wasn't even looking for anything suspicious. She had grabbed the bag to move it out of the hallway when something fell onto the floor. A pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. Her stomach tightened. She stared at it for several seconds, waiting for a simple explanation to appear in her mind. There wasn't one. Grant never carried things like that, and Alana already knew she was pregnant. When Grant walked in later that night, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the test placed directly in front of her. He stopped the moment he saw it. Neither of them spoke for a long second. Finally, Alana asked quietly, "Do you want to explain this?" Grant didn't look shocked. He didn't even look guilty. He simply set his keys down. "It's not what you think," he said. Alana gave a short, humorless laugh. That's usually the line people use when it's exactly what I think. Grant walked toward the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the sink. "You went through my bag? It fell out. And you immediately assume the worst. You're carrying someone else's pregnancy test." Grant rubbed his temple slowly. "It belongs to someone I know." Alana's voice sharpened. "Someone you're sleeping with?" Grant didn't answer. The silence answered for him. Alana felt the room close in around her. "How long?" she asked. Grant looked at her carefully before replying. "A few months." The words landed harder than any denial would have. "A few months," Alana repeated. While she had been preparing for motherhood, he had been building a second life. "Who is she?" Alana asked. Grant hesitated. That hesitation told her the truth would be worse than the betrayal itself. Finally, he said, "Her name is Lila." Alana searched her memory. The name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. "Lila Hart?" she said slowly. "The same Lila Hart who appeared on the evening news almost every night. The same reporter who covered development stories across the city." Grant nodded once. "She's been helping with media relations." Alana's eyes widened. "You're having an affair with a journalist covering your projects? It's not that simple." "Oh, it's very simple," Alana shot back. "You're sleeping with the person shaping public opinion about your developments." Grant's voice cooled. "You're turning this into something it isn't. You bribed inspectors. You're pushing families out of their homes. And now the reporter telling the city your projects are revitalizing neighborhoods is your girlfriend." Grant stepped closer. "Careful, Alana." "Careful?" she repeated. His voice dropped lower. "You're starting to connect things that could become problematic." The warning was clear. Alana stood up slowly. "So that's what this is," she said. Grant didn't respond. "You didn't just cheat," she continued. "You built an entire system around protecting your projects." Grant's expression hardened. "You're emotional. I'm observant. You're pregnant. I'm not blind." The tension between them thickened. Finally, Grant spoke again. "You should focus on the baby." Alana shook her head slowly. "You should focus on the fact that I now know exactly how far you're willing to go." Grant studied her carefully, not like a husband looking at his wife, more like a strategist reassessing a situation. And for the first time since their argument began, Alana saw something unsettling behind his calm expression. Not fear, calculation. Because Grant Whitaker wasn't worried about being caught. He was already thinking about how to control the damage. And if Alana refused to stay quiet, she had just crossed the line from partner to liability. After the night Alana confronted Grant about Lila Hart, the atmosphere in their house changed. Grant didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He simply shifted strategies, and the web began tightening around her. The first sign came at work. Alana walked into her office Monday morning, expecting another fight with Grant waiting at home that night. Instead, she found something worse. 3 of her biggest housing cases had suddenly been reassigned. Her managing partner looked uncomfortable as he explained it. City zoning complications, he said. Developers are pushing back hard. Developers? Alana asked. He avoided her eyes. Whitaker Development filed conflict complaints. Alana felt the ground move beneath her. They're claiming I'm biased because I'm married to Grant. Technically, they're not wrong. They're using my marriage to remove me from my own cases. Her partner sighed. It's temporary, but Alana knew exactly what it was. Grant wasn't arguing with her anymore. He was quietly dismantling her influence. That night she confronted him again. You filed legal complaints against me, she said the moment he walked through the door. Grant loosened his tie calmly. Standard legal strategy. You removed me from my own cases. You created the conflict by marrying me. Her hands clenched. You're punishing me for questioning you. Grant walked past her toward the kitchen. No, he said flatly. I'm managing risk. Alana followed him. You're trying to silence me. Grant turned slowly. And you're making this harder than it needs to be. The message was clear. Stop pushing, or things would get worse. But worse came anyway. 2 days later, Alana received a call from the bank. Her credit cards had been flagged for unusual activity. When she checked the account, she saw dozens of small charges she didn't recognize. Grant stood behind her while she scrolled through the transactions. You've been stressed lately, he said calmly. Sometimes people forget purchases. I didn't make these. Then maybe you forgot. The tone wasn't defensive. It was deliberate. Grant was planting doubt, creating a record, a pattern. Alana realized what he was doing almost instantly, gaslighting, building a narrative. She turned to him slowly. You're documenting this. Grant didn't deny it. I'm protecting our family. By pretending I'm unstable, you've been under pressure. And suddenly, my finances are chaotic? Grant shrugged. People notice patterns. Alana stared at him. You're building a case against me. Grant's expression remained neutral. You're interpreting things emotionally, and you're manipulating everything around me. Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're pregnant, Alana. Stress can affect judgment. The statement sounded calm, but it carried a clear threat. Grant wasn't just controlling money or work anymore. He was shaping how others saw her. And the next step came quickly. Her closest colleagues stopped returning calls. 2 clients suddenly withdrew their cases. Even their mutual friends began acting strangely distant. The isolation was happening too fast to be coincidence. When Alana finally confronted Grant again, he didn't bother pretending innocence. You're exhausting people, he said simply. No, she replied. You're scaring them. Grant smiled slightly. Influence isn't always loud. Alana felt a cold realization settle over her. Grant had resources, lawyers, media contacts, political connections. He wasn't just reacting to her accusations anymore. He was preparing something bigger. And if the pattern he was building succeeded, Alana Brooks wouldn't just lose arguments with her husband. She would lose credibility, her career, maybe even control over her own life. Grant Whitaker had stopped treating the conflict like a marriage problem. He was running it like a corporate operation. And in his world, obstacles didn't get debated. They got removed. By the time Alana realized how isolated she had become, there was only one person left she still trusted completely. Rachel Dunn. Rachel had been part of her life for almost a decade. They met when Alana was a young attorney helping tenants fight unsafe housing conditions at a hospital-owned apartment complex. Rachel was a junior administrator then, frustrated with the system, but willing to help. Over the years, the friendship grew into something deeper. Rachel was the one who celebrated when Alana won her first major case. The one who stood beside her at the wedding. The one who cried when Alana told her she was pregnant. So when the walls began closing in, Rachel was the person Alana called. They met late one evening at a quiet cafe near the hospital Rachel now helped manage. Alana didn't waste time. "Grant is setting me up," she said the moment they sat down. Rachel frowned. "Setting you up how?" Alana slid her phone across the table, showing the strange bank transactions, the legal conflict filings, the emails from her law firm removing her from cases. "He's building a record," Alana said. "Financial instability, emotional stress, professional conflicts." Rachel studied the screen carefully. "That's disturbing," she admitted. "And there's more," Alana said. She explained the affair with Lila Hart, the media influence, the development projects targeting entire neighborhoods. Rachel leaned back slowly. "You think this is all connected?" "I know it is." "And what exactly do you think he's planning?" Alana hesitated before answering. "I think he's preparing to destroy my credibility." Rachel's expression darkened. "That's extreme. So is everything he's already done." For a long moment, Rachel said nothing. Then she leaned forward. "If he's creating a narrative that you're unstable," she said carefully, "he'll eventually need medical documentation." Alana's stomach tightened. "You mean psychiatric records?" Rachel nodded slowly. "Chicago courts take those very seriously in custody disputes." The word custody landed hard. Alana rested a hand instinctively on her stomach. "He wouldn't go that far," she said quietly. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a different question. "Has he ever suggested counseling?" Alana thought back. Grant mentioning stress, suggesting therapy, encouraging professional evaluations. "Yes," she admitted. Rachel exhaled slowly. "That's how it usually starts." A cold chill ran down Alana's spine. "What do I do?" she asked. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You gather evidence before he can." "Evidence of what?" "Everything." Rachel's voice lowered. "Record conversations. Save financial statements. Document every time he tries to question your mental state." Alana nodded slowly. "You really think it's that serious?" Rachel met her eyes. "If he's building a legal narrative, you need to dismantle it before it reaches a courtroom." For the first time in weeks, Alana felt a flicker of hope. Someone believed her. Someone understood the danger. What Alana didn't know was that the conversation had already come too late. Because days earlier, Grant Whitaker had already met Rachel Dunn in private, not as a husband asking for help, but as a businessman presenting an offer. Rachel's hospital was in financial trouble. Expansion loans, budget overruns, pressure from the board. Grant knew everything. He also knew exactly how desperate Rachel had become, so he made a proposal. A donation large enough to stabilize the hospital. In exchange for one thing, medical cooperation. Rachel had listened quietly while he explained the plan. Temporary evaluations, documented behavioral concerns, professional observations that could raise questions about Alana's stability. Nothing illegal, Grant insisted. Just precautionary documentation. Rachel told herself she was protecting the hospital, protecting her career, convincing herself that Grant would never actually destroy his own wife. But as she sat across from Alana in that cafe, offering advice and promising to help gather evidence, Rachel already knew the truth. She had crossed a line, and the trap Alana feared was no longer a possibility. It was already being built. The legal trap began with something that sounded harmless, a prenatal consultation. Grant suggested it one evening, while Alana was reviewing documents at the dining table. "You've been under a lot of pressure," he said calmly. "Work, the pregnancy, everything going on between us." "Alana, I'm handling it." "Maybe," Grant replied, "but stress affects people differently." She closed the folder slowly. "Where is this coming from?" Grant kept his tone measured. "I spoke to Rachel earlier. She thinks it might help if you met with a specialist." Alana. "Rachel, her one remaining ally. What kind of prenatal mental health consultation?" "Completely routine." Alana studied him carefully. "You're recommending therapy." "I'm recommending support." "And Rachel suggested this?" Grant nodded. "She said the hospital has someone very experienced with high-stress pregnancies." The mention of Rachel lowered Alana's guard. Rachel knew the situation. Rachel understood the danger. If Rachel believed a consultation might help strengthen Alana's position, maybe it was worth doing. "Fine," Alana said finally. "One appointment." Grant smiled faintly. I'll schedule it. 3 days later, they arrived at the hospital Rachel helped run. Alana noticed something immediately. The appointment wasn't in the obstetrics department. It was in the behavioral health wing. Her steps slowed. Grant, this isn't prenatal counseling. It's part of the same program, he said quickly. Alana turned toward the front desk. The receptionist handed her a clipboard already filled with paperwork. Psychiatric intake forms. Her pulse quickened. This isn't what we discussed. Grant lowered his voice. It's just a formal assessment. I'm not signing psychiatric forms. The receptionist glanced nervously between them. Grant leaned closer. If you walk out, it looks like you're refusing medical advice. Alana's eyes narrowed. That's exactly the point, isn't it? Grant said nothing. The silence confirmed her suspicion. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. But Rachel had arranged this appointment. Rachel wouldn't betray her. Would she? Alana signed the paperwork. The evaluation room was small and sterile. A middle-aged psychiatrist sat across from her with a tablet. The questions began normally. Sleep patterns, stress levels, emotional support systems. Then the tone shifted. Have you experienced paranoia regarding your husband's actions? Alana stiffened. What kind of question is that? Just part of the evaluation. Did Grant tell you I'm paranoid? The doctor didn't answer directly. We're gathering a complete picture. The next question came quickly. Have you accused your husband of infidelity or criminal activity without clear evidence? Alana leaned forward. I have evidence. Have you presented it? I'm in the process of documenting it. The doctor typed something into the tablet. The interview continued for 40 minutes. Every answer Alana gave seemed to create another concern. Work stress, marital conflict, financial instability. When the session ended, she walked out feeling uneasy. Grant was waiting in the hallway. Well, he asked. It was strange, Alana said. They kept framing everything like I'm imagining things. Grant nodded slowly. That's probably the stress talking. She stared at him. Did you submit records before this appointment? Just background information. What kind of background information? Grant held her gaze calmly. Conversations we've had, financial concerns, behavioral changes. Alana felt the pieces snap together. You documented arguments. I was worried about you. You built a file. Grant didn't deny it. You've been unstable lately. Her heart began pounding. You set this up. Grant stepped closer. You agreed to the evaluation based on a lie, based on concern. Alana shook her head slowly. You're creating a medical record. Grant's voice dropped to a near whisper. Sometimes the truth needs documentation. At that moment, Rachel appeared at the end of the hallway. Alana turned toward her immediately. Rachel, what is going on here? Rachel stopped a few feet away. For the first time in their friendship, she wouldn't meet Alana's eyes. It's just a precautionary evaluation, Rachel said quietly. Alana felt the ground disappear beneath her. You told me to gather evidence against him. Rachel swallowed. And you should. But you brought me into this? Rachel's silence answered the question. Grant placed a hand gently on Alana's shoulder. The gesture looked supportive, but his grip tightened just enough for her to feel the message. You're surrounded by professionals who want to help you, he said softly. Alana stared at both of them. The husband building a legal case. The friend who had quietly opened the door for it. And suddenly, she understood the full scale of the trap. This wasn't just about arguments anymore. It was about creating official medical proof that Alana Brooks was mentally unstable. Once that narrative existed in hospital records, Grant wouldn't just control their marriage. He could control her life. After the hospital evaluation, Alana stopped trusting anything Grant said. Every word sounded calculated. Every calm smile looked rehearsed. And the worst part was the record that now existed inside the hospital system. Notes questioning her emotional stability, written by professionals who had only met her for 40 minutes. Grant had planted the first official seed. But Alana still didn't understand why he was going this far. The answer arrived 2 nights later. Grant had fallen asleep in his office, his laptop still open on the desk. Alana wasn't looking for a confrontation. She was looking for proof. If he was building a case against her, she needed to know what he was planning next. She opened the laptop. Grant normally locked everything. This time, he hadn't. A folder titled South Shore Redevelopment sat at the top of the screen. Alana clicked it. Inside were city maps, zoning permits, financial projections, and dozens of legal documents connected to a massive redevelopment zone along Chicago's South Side. Entire blocks highlighted in red. Thousands of homes, schools, churches, all marked for acquisition. Her stomach tightened as she scrolled through the files. This wasn't just another development. It was a complete land takeover. Then she saw something that made her breath catch. One document carried a familiar legal reference. Brooks Family Trust, conditional land rights. Her name was attached to it. Alana opened the file. The words hit her like a hammer. Decades earlier, her grandfather had helped create a community land trust, protecting parts of the neighborhood from aggressive developers. The trust required approval from a designated legal guardian in the family. That guardian was now Alana. Without her consent, Grant's company couldn't legally acquire several key blocks needed to complete the redevelopment project. But another clause sat beneath it. If the guardian was declared mentally incompetent, control of the trust would temporarily transfer to the guardian's spouse on behalf of their child. Grant. The room suddenly felt smaller. All the pieces connected at once. The financial isolation, the professional conflicts, the psychiatric evaluation. Grant wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to remove her legal authority. Alana kept scrolling. One financial projection estimated the completed redevelopment would generate over $1 billion in property value. Her hands started to shake. Grant wasn't just destroying her credibility. He was preparing to erase the final legal barrier standing between him and a billion-dollar land deal. And the trap had been designed perfectly. If Alana fought too hard, the hospital records would make her look unstable. If she refused cooperation, Grant could argue she was emotionally unfit during pregnancy. If the court believed the narrative, he would gain control of the trust through their child. The project would move forward. Thousands of families would be forced out of their homes, all while Alana Brooks was legally declared incapable of stopping it. A quiet sound behind her made her freeze. Grant stood in the doorway. He had been watching her read. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Grant stepped inside and closed the door. "So," he said calmly, "now you know." Alana turned slowly. "You're trying to steal land that my family protected for generations." Grant didn't deny it. "I'm redeveloping underused property. You're displacing entire neighborhoods. I'm modernizing them. You're using me to do it." Grant folded his arms. "You're exaggerating." Alana lifted the document on the screen. "This clause transfers control of the trust to you if I'm declared mentally incompetent." Grant's expression didn't change. "That's standard legal structure. You engineered this entire situation." Grant walked closer to the desk. "You're looking at it emotionally. I'm looking at it legally." Grant stopped beside her chair. "For the project to move forward," he said quietly, "someone has to make rational decisions. And you've decided I'm not capable of that." Grant's voice dropped lower. "You've already started proving my point." Alana stared at him. "You're destroying your own wife to close a real estate deal." Grant met her gaze without hesitation. "This city runs on opportunity and morality." Grant gave a small, almost amused smile. "That's a luxury most developers can't afford." The calmness in his voice chilled her. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. Grant Whitaker had calculated every step months in advance. And now that Alana understood the real motive, she realized something even worse. The plan was already too far in motion to stop with a simple argument. If she wanted to protect her child, her family's land, and the thousands of people living on it, she would have to fight a man who had already turned the legal system against her. The final stage of Grant Whitaker's plan began sooner than anyone expected. Alana went into labor 5 weeks early. The contractions started just after midnight, sharp, sudden, and close together. Grant drove her to the hospital with controlled urgency, both hands steady on the wheel, his voice calm as he called ahead. Alana barely noticed the details through the pain. But when they arrived, the first sign of trouble appeared. The hospital staff seemed prepared. 2 nurses were already waiting with a wheelchair before Grant even finished parking. Paperwork had been preloaded. Her file was already flagged in the system. Alana was rushed through triage faster than any normal admission. She was too focused on the contractions to question it. Hours later, after exhausting labor and a blur of voices in the delivery room, the baby finally arrived. A boy. Alana heard his cry before she saw him, and the sound cut through everything. Fear, anger, exhaustion. For a moment, nothing else mattered. A nurse lifted the baby briefly so she could see his face. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "My son," she whispered. But the moment passed too quickly. Instead of placing the baby in her arms, the nurse hesitated and looked toward the doorway. Grant was standing there, watching, waiting. Alana felt a flicker of unease. "Can I hold him?" she asked. The nurse didn't answer immediately. Grant stepped forward. "Maybe not yet," he said calmly. Alana frowned, confused and exhausted. "What do you mean, not yet?" A second nurse entered the room, holding a clipboard. The mood shifted instantly. "We need to conduct a brief evaluation," the nurse said carefully. "Evaluation for what?" Alana asked. Grant answered before anyone else could. "For postpartum mental health." Alana stared at him. "Right now? I just gave birth." "It's routine," Grant replied smoothly. "No, it isn't." The nurse, holding the clipboard, spoke again. "We've received medical notes recommending immediate observation." Alana, "From who?" No one answered directly. Instead, the door opened again. Rachel stepped inside. For a moment, Alana thought relief might come with her, but Rachel's face looked pale, avoidant. "Rachel," Alana said, voice shaking, "tell them this is ridiculous." "Rachel, it's just precautionary," she said quietly. The words felt rehearsed. The room began spinning. "You're serious?" Alana asked. "Grant, you've been under extreme stress," he said softly. "The doctors want to be careful." "You told them I'm unstable." "I told them the truth." The nurse. Alana's instinct snapped instantly. "No, wait." Her arms reached out. "I want to hold my son." The nurse hesitated again. "Grant, not until the evaluation is complete." The words hit harder than the labor pain ever had. "You're taking him away from me. It's temporary." "Grant, this is insane." The nurse holding the clipboard stepped forward. "We need to ask a few questions." Alana looked around the room. The nurses. Rachel. Grant. Everyone watching her reaction. Waiting. Documenting. She understood the trap immediately. If she shouted, it would confirm their story. If she resisted, it would become proof she was unstable. Every emotion she showed would become evidence against her. Her voice came out hoarse. "You planned this." Grant didn't deny it. "This is about safety." "For who?" "For our child." The baby's cries echoed across the room as the nurse carried him toward the hallway. Alana felt something inside her break. "Bring him back," she said. No one moved. Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You cannot separate a newborn from his mother like this." The nurse began writing notes on the clipboard. Rachel turned away. Grant simply watched. Then two hospital security guards stepped into the doorway. Alana's heart slammed against her ribs. "Grant," she whispered, "don't do this." Grant leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You should stay calm," he said quietly, "because the doctors are about to decide something very important." Alana's stomach dropped. "What decision?" Grant straightened his jacket. "Whether you're mentally fit to be around your son." In that moment, Alana realized the final stage of the trap had already begun. And this time, the entire hospital was part of it. While Grant Whitaker was finalizing control over his wife's life inside a Chicago hospital, a man stepped off a late-night train at Union Station. He carried a worn leather briefcase and moved with the quiet patience of someone used to watching before acting. His name was Harold Brooks. Most people in Chicago didn't recognize it anymore. Years earlier, Harold had been one of the most relentless federal financial crimes investigators in the country. He had spent decades dismantling corporate fraud networks, exposing corrupt officials, and sending powerful executives to prison. That work came with consequences, enemies, threats, and eventually distance from the people he cared about most, including his daughter. Harold and Alana hadn't spoken regularly in years. Their relationship had grown strained after he disappeared into federal investigations that kept him away for months at a time. But distance didn't mean ignorance. When Harold received a short message from an old contact inside Chicago's legal community, he read it 3 times before responding. "Your daughter's husband is moving fast. Something feels wrong." Harold didn't waste time asking questions. He booked the next train to Chicago. By the time he arrived, Alana had already been moved into the psychiatric observation wing of the hospital, and Grant Whitaker believed the situation was under control. Inside the hospital, Harold requested a visitor pass. The receptionist checked the system. "She's under medical observation," the woman explained politely. "Visits are restricted." Harold nodded once. "I understand." He slid a small federal credential across the desk. The woman's expression shifted instantly. Harold spoke calmly. "I'm not asking for medical details. I'm informing you that if my daughter's legal rights are being violated, the hospital will eventually need to explain its decisions." Within minutes, the hospital administration agreed to schedule a supervised visit. Harold waited in a quiet hallway until the doors opened. Alana walked into the room slowly, still wearing hospital clothing, exhaustion visible in her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Harold saw something he hadn't seen since she was a child. Fear. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Alana sat down across from him. Her voice trembled, but the words came quickly. She told him everything. Grant's financial control, the legal conflicts, the psychiatric evaluation, Rachel's betrayal, the land trust, the hospital intervention immediately after birth. Harold listened without interrupting. By the time she finished, the room had gone completely silent. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have proof of the land trust clause?" "Yes." "Do you have proof of the financial transfers?" "Some." Harold nodded slowly. "That's enough to start." Alana looked at him sharply. "Start what?" Harold leaned forward slightly. "A corruption investigation." She shook her head. "Grant controls too many people. Lawyers, media, hospital administrators." Harold's expression didn't change. "Everyone makes mistakes when they get comfortable." "This isn't just greed," Alana said. "He built an entire narrative that I'm unstable." Harold's voice stayed calm, "which means he needs professionals to support that narrative." "Yes. Doctors, administrators, financial intermediaries." Alana frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying conspiracies leave trails." He tapped the table once. "Payments, communications, favors." Alana studied him carefully. "You think we can expose him?" Harold met her gaze. "I know we can." For the first time since the hospital doors closed behind her, Alana felt something shift. Hope. But Harold raised a finger slightly. "However," he said, "we have a bigger problem first." "What?" "You're still legally under psychiatric observation." Alana's stomach tightened. "If they declare me unstable, the land trust clause activates," Harold finished. She nodded slowly. Harold leaned back in the chair. "That means Grant isn't just trying to destroy your credibility. He's racing a legal clock. And the hospital evaluation is the final trigger." Alana's voice dropped. "Then we're out of time." Harold looked toward the door, thinking. When he spoke again, his tone was sharper. "No." "Why?" "Because Grant Whitaker made a mistake." Alana frowned. "What mistake?" Harold stood slowly. "He assumed the only person who could challenge his plan was you." Alana watched him carefully. "And that's wrong?" Harold picked up his briefcase. "Yes," he said calmly, "because now he has to deal with someone who spent 30 years dismantling criminals exactly like him." For the first time since the trap began closing around her life, Grant Whitaker had unknowingly created a new problem, one he had never planned for. And unlike Alana, Harold Brooks had no intention of playing defense. The moment Harold Brooks walked out of the hospital, he stopped thinking like a father. He started thinking like an investigator. Grant Whitaker had constructed a legal narrative. Unstable wife, concerned husband, responsible hospital intervention. If Harold wanted to destroy that narrative, he needed proof the entire situation had been engineered. And proof meant following the money. His first stop was a quiet office belonging to a former city building inspector named Leonard Pike. Pike had resigned from the department 2 years earlier after filing complaints about development permits being approved without proper review. Harold placed a printed map of the South Shore redevelopment zone on the table. You recognize this project? Harold asked. Pike stared at it for a long moment before nodding. Whitaker Development, he said. Tell me what you know. Pike leaned back in his chair. They've been buying influence for years. Inspectors get pressure from City Hall. Permits get rushed through. Buildings suddenly fail safety checks. Families get forced out. Harold slid another document across the table. This redevelopment depends on a land trust approval controlled by my daughter. Pike looked up sharply. Then Whitaker has a problem. Not if he removes her authority. Pike frowned. What do you mean? Harold explained the psychiatric evaluation, the hospital involvement, the legal clause transferring control if Alana was declared mentally incompetent. Pike's expression darkened. That's not just corruption, he said. That's a setup. Exactly. Harold tapped the document again. I need evidence that Whitaker has been coordinating with people who helped build that setup. Pike didn't hesitate. You should start with the hospital. The next lead came faster than Harold expected. One of Pike's former colleagues, still working inside city inspection, quietly shared something unusual, a payment record. Whitaker Development had recently made a six-figure donation to the hospital where Alana was being held. The donation had been processed through a corporate charity foundation, but the timing stood out. The transfer happened less than 2 weeks before Alana's psychiatric evaluation. Harold stared at the record. Who approved the donation? He asked. The answer came quickly. Rachel Dunn, the same hospital administrator who had encouraged Alana to attend the evaluation. Harold's jaw tightened. The next connection appeared within hours. Using old investigative contacts, Harold requested financial activity tied to Lila Hart, the reporter involved with Grant. The results confirmed what Alana suspected. Large consulting payments had been routed from Whitaker Development to a small media consulting firm connected to Lila. The payments began months earlier, right when positive news coverage of Grant's redevelopment projects started appearing across local stations. Harold placed the documents side by side. Hospital donations, media payments, inspection pressure. Every piece pointed toward a coordinated operation. Grant Whitaker wasn't just planning a development project. He was controlling every system capable of opposing it. But Harold still needed something stronger. Proof the psychiatric narrative itself had been manipulated. A young nurse working the psychiatric observation floor contacted Pike quietly after hearing rumors about the investigation. She had reviewed Alana's intake records. Something didn't add up. According to hospital logs, the psychiatric consultation recommending observation had been filed before Alana even arrived in labor. Harold read the timestamp twice. The recommendation existed in the system hours before the baby was born, which meant one thing. The hospital had already prepared to label Alana mentally unstable before the evaluation even happened. Harold leaned back slowly. Grant hadn't simply taken advantage of a stressful moment after childbirth. He had arranged the diagnosis in advance. Harold closed the folder and looked at Pike. This isn't just a custody manipulation. No, Pike agreed quietly. This is conspiracy. Harold stood and gathered the documents. Grant Whitaker believed he had built a flawless legal trap, but every system he manipulated, finance, media, healthcare, city permits, left evidence behind. And the deeper Harold looked, the more dangerous the situation became for Grant. Because corruption was one crime, medical fraud was another. But coordinating both to seize control of a billion-dollar land deal? That was the kind of case federal investigators built careers on. And Harold Brooks knew exactly who to call next. Inside the psychiatric observation unit, time moved differently. Doors stayed locked. Nurses watched everything. Every reaction was written down. Every emotion became a line in a medical report. Alana understood the system quickly. If she showed anger, it became agitation. If she argued, it became instability. If she cried, it became emotional imbalance. Grant had built the trap perfectly. The only way out was control. Absolute control. So Alana stopped reacting. The next morning, when the attending psychiatrist entered the room with a clipboard, she sat calmly in the chair beside the window. How are you feeling today? The doctor asked. Tired, Alana said evenly. I gave birth yesterday. The doctor nodded and wrote something down. Do you still believe your husband is trying to harm you? Alana met his eyes without raising her voice. I believe there is a financial conflict involving my family's land trust. The doctor paused slightly. That's a serious accusation. It's a legal fact, she replied. You can verify the trust documents. The doctor typed notes into the tablet. And you believe the hospital is involved? I believe hospital staff were influenced by outside pressure. The doctor studied her expression. You're very calm about this. I'm an attorney, Alana said. Calm is useful. The doctor finished the evaluation and left. Through the small glass window in the door, Alana noticed two nurses whispering quietly, watching her, waiting for a crack. But the crack never came. That afternoon, Harold returned for the scheduled visit. He sat across from her at the same table as before. Things are moving, he said quietly. Good or bad? Alana asked. Both. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Alana opened it carefully. Bank records, hospital donations, media payments, inspection complaints, evidence linking Grant's company to the people who helped create the narrative against her. Her pulse quickened. You found this already? Only the beginning. She studied the documents again. Is it enough? Not yet. Alana looked up. Then what do we do? Harold leaned forward slightly. You dismantle the medical case. How? You prove the evaluation was manipulated. Alana's mind began working immediately. She knew the legal standards for psychiatric holds. Difficulty had to show observable behavior, direct examination, professional assessment. If any step was falsified, the entire record could collapse. I need copies of my intake file, she said. Harold nodded. I'm working on that. And I need staff names, she continued. Everyone who signed those documents. You'll have them. Alana leaned back slowly, thinking through the strategy. They're expecting emotional instability, she said. So give them the opposite. Exactly. The next day, she began documenting everything. She wrote down every time a nurse entered the room, every question asked, every medication offered, every note taken. When the staff tried to provoke reactions, she responded calmly. When doctors repeated the same questions about paranoia and stress, she answered with clear, measured language. By the third day, the staff began noticing something unexpected. The woman they had been told was unstable behaved with remarkable control. Professional, precise, even analytical. One nurse finally asked the question directly. Why are you writing everything down? Alana looked up from her notebook. Because documentation matters, the nurse frowned. You think someone is manipulating your case. Alana met her eyes calmly. I know they are. The nurse hesitated before leaving the room. Later that evening, Rachel appeared outside the observation unit. She stood behind the glass wall, staring at Alana from the hallway. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Rachel stepped inside. Her voice was barely audible. You're making this worse. Alana closed the notebook slowly. No, she said. I'm exposing it. Rachel's hands trembled slightly. You don't understand how powerful Grant's connections are. Alana stood up. I understand perfectly. Rachel lowered her voice further. If the evaluation concludes you're unstable, the court will accept it. And if the... Rachel froze. That would destroy everyone involved, she whispered. Alana's gaze hardened. Exactly. Rachel stared at her for a long moment before stepping back toward the door. Fear was visible in her face now, because the woman trapped inside the psychiatric ward wasn't collapsing the way Grant expected. She was building a legal case. And the more evidence Alana documented, the closer the entire conspiracy moved toward exposure. The investigation moved faster than Grant Whitaker expected. For weeks, he had controlled the narrative. Unstable wife, responsible husband, medical professionals acting out of caution. But that story began collapsing the moment Harold Brooks delivered the evidence to federal investigators. The documents were impossible to ignore. Financial transfers from Whitaker Development to a hospital foundation. Consulting payments routed to a media company tied to Lila Hart. Inspection records showing pressure from developers tied to the same redevelopment zone. And most damaging of all, the hospital intake record recommending psychiatric observation before Alana had even given birth. Within 48 hours, A federal task force quietly opened a corruption review, and once investigators started asking questions, the pressure inside the hospital changed overnight. The first sign came when Alana's attending psychiatrist entered the observation room with a different tone. The calm certainty was gone. Instead, he looked cautious. "Miss Brooks," he said carefully, "we're reviewing some administrative details regarding your admission." Alana closed the notebook she had been writing in. "What kind of details?" "Documentation timelines." She nodded slowly. "Good." The doctor hesitated. "You seem confident about this situation." "I'm confident records will tell the truth." The statement made him uncomfortable, because now the hospital staff understood something they hadn't realized before. Their paperwork wasn't just internal medical documentation anymore. It had become evidence. Meanwhile, across the city, investigators were speaking with the people Grant believed were loyal. The first to crack was a junior accountant working inside Whitaker Development. When federal agents presented the financial records linking the company to the hospital donation, the accountant panicked. He admitted the payment had been labeled as a charitable contribution on Grant's direct orders. But the money hadn't come from a philanthropic budget. It had been pulled from the redevelopment project's legal fund, which meant the hospital donation was directly connected to the land acquisition deal. That revelation triggered the next wave of questions. At the hospital, Rachel Dunn was called into an administrative review meeting. 3 investigators sat across the table. They asked simple questions. Who approved the donation? Why was the psychiatric evaluation scheduled through her department? Why did the intake file exist before Alana arrived in labor? Rachel tried to stay calm, but the timeline didn't make sense anymore. Every answer she gave created another contradiction. When investigators finally placed the financial transfer record in front of her, Rachel's hands began to shake. "This was a hospital expansion donation," she insisted. One of the investigators leaned forward slightly. "Then why did the recommendation for psychiatric observation appear in the system 3 hours before the patient was admitted?" Rachel didn't answer. Across town, Grant Whitaker received the first warning call from one of his attorneys. "Federal investigators are asking questions about your hospital donations." Grant remained calm. "That's routine for large projects. It's not routine when it involves psychiatric evaluations connected to your wife." Grant's expression hardened. "Who is talking?" "We don't know yet." Grant ended the call and stared out the window of his office. For the first time since the plan began, something had shifted. Someone was pulling the threads. And whoever it was understood the entire structure of the operation. Back at the hospital, Alana sat across from Harold during another supervised visit. "They've started questioning people," Harold said quietly. Alana studied his face. "How serious is it?" "Serious enough that everyone involved is thinking about self-preservation." Her voice dropped. "That means someone will break. Eventually." Alana glanced toward the glass wall where a nurse was pretending not to listen. "They're nervous now." "They should be." Harold leaned closer. "Because once the investigation reaches the development project itself, everything Whitaker built starts collapsing." Alana took a slow breath. "For weeks, he controlled the narrative." Harold nodded. "And now the narrative is being investigated. Across Chicago, federal agents were already requesting search warrants tied to Whitaker Development. Financial records, communication logs, internal emails. Grant Whitaker had spent months building a flawless legal trap. But now every step of that plan was being examined by people trained to dismantle corruption. And the deeper they looked, the closer the entire empire came to exploding. Grant Whitaker realized the situation was collapsing the moment federal agents walked into his office building. They arrived early in the morning. No warning. No negotiation. 3 agents and a warrant. Employees watched silently as investigators moved through the executive floor, collecting computers, financial records, and internal files tied to the South Shore redevelopment project. Grant stood inside the glass conference room, jaw tight, while his legal team scrambled to respond. "This is procedural," one of his attorneys said quickly. "They're fishing for something." Grant didn't answer. He knew investigators didn't move this fast without a reason. And somewhere, someone had already talked. The next blow came an hour later. Rachel Dunn was escorted out of the hospital in handcuffs. Medical fraud. Conspiracy to falsify psychiatric documentation. Hospital staff watched in stunned silence as investigators led her through the lobby. Rachel kept her head down, refusing to look at anyone. Inside the psychiatric unit, the news reached Alana within minutes. A nurse stepped into the observation room, her voice uncertain. "They're releasing you for re-evaluation." Alana stood slowly. "Because the paperwork is being questioned." The nurse nodded. "It appears the intake documentation may have been irregular." Irregular. Alana almost laughed at the understatement, but she remained calm as she gathered her notebook and walked toward the exit doors she hadn't been allowed to cross for days. In the hallway, Harold was waiting. "They arrested Rachel," he said quietly. Alana stopped walking. "For what exactly?" "Medical fraud and conspiracy." She absorbed the words slowly. Rachel had chosen money over loyalty, and now the system she helped manipulate was turning against her. But Rachel wasn't the only one collapsing under pressure. Across the city, Lila Hart sat in a newsroom conference room facing two federal investigators. They slid financial records across the table, consulting payments from Whitaker Development, emails coordinating favorable coverage of redevelopment projects, requests to delay investigative reports that might expose displacement lawsuits. Lila's confident media persona disappeared quickly. "This was standard consulting work," she argued. One of the investigators tapped the email printout. "Then why are you discussing hospital documentation connected to Mr. Whitaker's wife?" Lila's face went pale. Meanwhile, Grant's legal team was losing control of the situation. Every device seized from Whitaker Development revealed new evidence. Internal emails referencing neutralizing the land trust problem. Messages discussing the timing of Alana's psychiatric evaluation. Even financial projections assuming the trust would transfer under Grant's authority once she was declared mentally incompetent. The paper trail was devastating. By late afternoon, federal agents returned to Whitaker Development with a second warrant. This time, it wasn't for documents. It was for Grant. His attorneys protested immediately. "You have no grounds for an arrest." The lead agent placed a folder on the conference table. Inside were printed emails, financial transfers, and hospital records. "Conspiracy to commit fraud," the agent said calmly. "Medical record manipulation. Financial bribery tied to a federal corruption investigation." Grant stared at the documents. For months, he had believed every variable was under control. But one factor had changed everything. Harold Brooks. Grant looked up slowly. "You're making a mistake," he said. The agent shook his head. "No," he replied. "You made one." Grant stood motionless as the agents stepped forward. For the first time since the plan began, he looked uncertain. Not angry, not defensive, just surprised. As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, the reality finally became unavoidable. The empire he had built through influence, money, and control was collapsing piece by piece. Across town, Alana walked out of the hospital into the open air for the first time since the night her son was taken from her arms. The legal trap had failed. Grant Whitaker had tried to erase her authority. Instead, he had exposed the corruption holding his empire together, and now the entire structure was falling. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Grant Whitaker stood between his attorneys, the confidence that once defined him completely gone. For months, he had insisted the investigation was exaggerated, misunderstood, political. But the evidence had dismantled every defense. Financial records, emails, hospital documentation, witness testimony. Even Rachel Dunn had taken the stand after negotiating her plea agreement. Her voice trembled as she described the plan. Grant had ordered the psychiatric intake prepared before Alana even arrived at the hospital. The goal was simple: declare her unstable, gain temporary control of the family land trust, and push the redevelopment project forward without resistance. When the jury returned, they didn't hesitate. Guilty on all counts. Grant closed his eyes briefly as the words echoed across the courtroom. The empire he built through manipulation, pressure, and influence had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Across the aisle, Alana held her son close. For the first time since the night of his birth, she felt completely steady. The fear that once consumed her had transformed into something stronger: resolve. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for a statement. Harold stood beside her as cameras turned in their direction. One reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. After everything that happened, what matters most to you now? Alana looked down at her son before answering. My mother created the land trust to protect families who had lived in those neighborhoods for generations, she said calmly. What happened to me was an attempt to erase that protection. She paused, her voice steady but firm. But the trust is still here. And now more people understand why it exists. Harold nodded quietly beside her. The battle had been brutal, but the legacy survived. That evening, Alana walked through the neighborhood streets the redevelopment project had once threatened to erase. Lights glowed in apartment windows. Children played on the sidewalks. Families sat on their front steps talking. The community was still alive. She held her son a little closer. The fight had never been about revenge. It was about protection, about making sure power couldn't quietly destroy the people it was meant to serve. And now the responsibility belonged to her. If this story reminded you how fragile justice can be and how powerful one voice can become when it refuses to disappear, share it with someone who believes courage still matters.